Okay, welcome everybody to Photography 101. My name is Zach Layton. I'm the creative director and founder of Reliant Creative. I love stories. I love telling stories and helping ministries communicate what God is doing through their organizations more effectively. I've been a photographer for 10 years, and I think it's important to note uh, that even though I've been a photographer for 10 years, this is the first time I've ever taught photography. And I say that because it's taken 10 years to get to a point in my photography skills where I feel confident teaching the medium. I was not a good photographer when I started. I loved it. I was passionate about it, but I wasn't necessarily all that good. And I believe that photography is an art form that everyone can become great at with practice. And the key is to take a lot of images and know the rules so that you know how to follow them and sometimes how to break them. And we're going to talk about some of the rules today. Now, why are we doing this? Why am I spending time teaching better photography to missionaries and national partners around the world? I believe that God is at work globally in really incredible and powerful ways, and ways in which much of the church is oftentimes unaware, right? So the idea is pretty simple, really. What if we could communicate how God is working globally on a more regular basis? What could that mean for ushering in his kingdom? What could that mean for the growth and effectiveness of missionaries? What could that mean for prayerful and financial investment in ministries doing incredible things globally? I believe that if we could tell the stories of how God is at work with greater consistency, it would first and foremost bring him glory, and secondly, could help ministries have greater kingdom impact by um, communicating what God's doing to the church so that she can see, hey, God's at work in this place. We want to prayerfully and financially invest in the work that he's doing. Stories are powerful. Stories are how humans relate to the world. Stories are incredibly important to God. They are how he primarily chose to speak to us through his word. And God takes stories seriously. So what could it look like to tell those stories of how he is at work around the world? And this is the questions that I want to or hope to answer. And this is where you guys come in too. I think it's unrealistic to think that ministries around the world have the resources to tell a high production value stories with teams and teams of photographers and videographers on a consistent basis. To be sending photographers and videographers all over the world to tell high production value stories is just not cost effective. And so ministries need to be telling those stories. They need to be communicating to their donor bases on a regular basis. So what could it look like if we empowered missionaries and national partners who are already in the field, who are on the ground, seeing the life transformation take place, seeing God at work? What if we were to turn those national partners and missionaries into capable and talented photographers? What if we were to turn you guys into capable and talented videographers and storytellers and copywriters? What if missionaries and national partners were able to create content on behalf of ministry headquarters with regularity and consistency? I think we could keep donors up to date with better practices and better content strategies. We could keep them more informed on what to pray for. And I truly believe that this would result in greater financial support and ultimately greater kingdom impact. So we want to help you guys become capable and talented photographers that can tell your ministry stories regularly. And I think if we can do that, the opportunities are really exciting. So before we get into composition and lighting and all the other things that we're going to discuss today, I want to take some time to walk through the best practices for technique. Before we take better pictures or better images, we need to know how to get the most out of our gear. So whether you're shooting with an SLR or an interchangeable lens camera or a mobile device, mirrorless camera, whatever it may be, how we use our tools is really important. In the same way that the improper use of a hammer can result in poor outcomes, the ineffective use of camera gear can cause negative effects on our images. And since this is Photography 101, I'm going to focus on mobile devices. I will get into SLR techniques in our advanced photography course that's going to be coming, but most of us will be using our mobile devices. Most of you guys in the field are going to be using your mobile devices. And so I want to give you guys the skills to use today to use those tools effectively and use them well. Mobile devices have come a really long way. They're amazing photography and video tools now. And so we can get a lot out of these tools. I have always enjoyed this quote by Chase Jarvis that you see on this slide. The best camera is the one that you have with you. I have some of the best gear that camera offers, and yet I take almost all of my most important images that I will ever take in my life. I take those images with my iPhone. My camera phone is always on me. And when my children who are 4 and 2 and 9 months old, when they learn to crawl or walk, when they speak their first words, when they learn how to ride their bike for the first time, my phone is what ends up capturing those moments because it's within reach. It's on my person. It's in my pocket. I don't have to run and get my big expensive camera gear. Our phones are powerful storytelling tools, and it's important that we learn how to get the most out of these devices, especially in a ministry context where you guys are in the field seeing this life transformation firsthand. All right, so technique. The figure on the left is holding the camera phone the correct way. He has a solid hold on the phone. His elbows are tucked in tight into his torso, creating more stability. In low light scenarios where the camera requires a slower shutter speed, this is going to help decrease the potential for blurry images. We're going to want to hold the phone in both hands. You can see with the left hand of this guy on the left, he's holding the phone completely. He's got a good grasp on that phone. His elbows are pointed in towards his torso and towards his feet. He's leaning his elbows against the stomach to have those stability points, almost like a tripod. If your phone has a physical camera trigger, use that. That will make the process more convenient and reduce the risk that you're going to blur your photos. You can see in that figure on the left, his index finger is holding on to and using the volume button as the camera trigger. And look how calm that guy is on the left. He's confident in his technique, and he knows the result will come out great. Now, you'll notice the figure on the right does not have a solid hold on the phone. He's barely holding onto the phone with his fingers. This is going to result in dropping the phone and blurry images because there's not a solid grasp on that phone, especially in low light situations and scenarios. This is going to be more often not the area where you'll get results that are blurry photos, because any movement will cause the image to come out blurry. Any movement in that camera. We have to hold our camera still when we take our images. Look at his elbows. They're flying all over the place. He's stabbing at the back of the screen, trying to press the shutter button. That's another reason his photos are turning out blurry. And look how angry he is, right? Probably because his photos aren't very good all the time. Here's another example. Here the figure is demonstrating how you hold the phone properly in portrait mode or a vertical composition. You'll notice the figure on the right, again, is stabbing at his phone, and he doesn't have a solid hold on the device. Again, he's angry, he's frustrated because his images are terrible. And the figure on the left, he's calm and confident. Notice that the figure on the left is grabbing the phone, again, with his entire hand. Our phones are not fragile and flimsy devices. We can hold on to them. We can grab them with our whole hand. Get a good grip on that phone, and then use that either the volume button or whatever trigger button you guys have. I don't know if all cameras have that capability, all camera phones, but I know the iPhones, you're able to push that volume button as a trigger for your camera. All right, so composition. The fastest route to better photography is composition, and focusing on better compositions is going to get you taking better pictures faster than focusing on any other skill, more than technique, more than lighting, more than perspective, and even more than focusing on capturing the right moment or the right emotion. Focusing on better composition as you learn and develop your skills is going to provide the fastest results and the most consistent results. And that's what we're trying to get at, is consistent results with our images. Once you understand and master the rules of composition, you can start breaking those rules. There are no hard and fast rules in photography, but we want to understand the rules so that when we break those rules, there is a reason, and we can point to that reason and say, this is why I chose to break that compositional rule. So the rule we're going to discuss today is the rule of thirds. This is easily the most recognizable and most common tool that is used in any discussion around composition. There are a handful of others that you're welcome to explore, but this is going to be the easiest and most widely used. The idea is really simple. Essentially, you can envision a big hashtag on your frame that splits the frame into thirds, both vertically and horizontally. And you'll notice that there are 4 points at which the lines intersect. Those points are generally where you'll want to place your subject in the frame. So in this example, we are close enough to the subject that we can both fit both of his eyes on different intersecting points. And as you move away from your subject, that's not going to be possible any longer. But with this particular image, we're close enough to where his eyes almost land on both of those intersecting points. One important note to remember: eyes are incredibly important in photography. When a viewer looks at an image, the eyes will always be the first thing that the viewer's eyes are drawn towards. So when I look at an image as a viewer, the first thing I'm going to see is the eyes. The eyes will engage the viewer far better than any other element in a photo. And I'll say it now, and we'll discuss it again in the focus portion of this class, but 99.9% of the time, you should be focusing on the eyes. That's where our images should be the sharpest. If you're not close enough to focus on the eyes, you can focus on the face, but we're going to want to focus on the eyes and the face almost 100% of the time. Now, here's an example of a subject that is far enough away from the camera to land on one of the intersecting points. You'll notice in this image that the main subject is placed on the left intersecting point, the upper left intersecting point, and she is facing in the direction of the greatest amount of negative space in this image. The image is weighted towards where she is looking. So if I had placed this subject, this girl, on the right intersecting line, or on the right horizontal line or vertical line, the image would feel unsettling to us as viewers. I would probably have had to have cut off the secondary subject, that girl in the background, and it would feel as if the primary subject was facing or smashed up against a wall. And unless we're trying to depict walls closing in on our subject, we never want to never want the viewer to feel that way about an image, like the walls are closing in on them. You'll notice that the second subject is placed on the right intersecting line. She's blurred out and she's in the background, so she's not our primary focus, but she does help to tell this story and bring balance to this image. You'll also notice on this slide that I've shown this image with the iPhone camera settings. And as you learn and practice better compositions, you can turn on your camera's grid. In your camera settings, it'll have a setting to turn on or off your grid. I think most camera phones will allow you to do that. And this is going to help you think about the rule of thirds as you take pictures with your camera phone. So make sure that you have that grid turned on. All right, so let's walk through this image and discuss how our eyes engage with a photo. So as a viewer of this image, we first look at the subject's eyes, this girl on the left, right? Then we then follow where she is looking, which is the sifting box that she is holding. Because our eyes are already moving towards the right of the frame, we naturally follow along towards the direction our subject is facing, and we see the second girl in the image, right? This secondary subject in the image, she although she is blurred out and in the background, she plays a really important role in bringing balance to this image and helping us tell a more complete story. From that secondary subject, our eyes literally run into a wall on the far right and in that dark section of the photo, and there's nothing to see. So they have to go somewhere, and they continue up towards the top of the frame, following where the light is. And now we've arrived at the third subject in this frame. The beam of light plays a really important role in this image. First, it creates the mood and provides the tone of this photo. It provides the beauty of this image. Without this beam of light, this image is not nearly as strong. And in fact, it might be an unusable photo without the light in this image. But the beam of light is there, and it beautifully separates our subject from the background. So the beam of light subject, that third subject, also reveals how dirty and how dusty the air is that these girls are breathing. And it's helping us tell the story more effectively and more clearly, right? It shows that these girls are not working in the best work environments. And then lastly, the beam of light brings us full circle back to our subject. So our eyes, as a viewer, have now made a complete circle within the frame, and they've seen everything that there is to see. And the feeling that we get at the end of this circular path through the frame is one of satisfaction, right? Some other elements to take note of in this image are the walls in this image. They give that sense that the walls are closing in on these girls and that they don't have a way out of their circumstance. You can also see the support beam behind our subject, that big wood beam there. Once the viewer has made the full circle within the frame we just talked about, our eyes are going to want to find a way out of the frame in order to feel completely satisfied with an image. So this beam behind our subject gives our eyes a way out of the frame, both vertically, both towards the top of the frame and towards the bottom of the frame. It's a way of escaping the frame, if you will. And so there's a level of completion when we look at this image because our eyes have a way in and out with that beam. Now, this is one of my favorite images that I've ever taken. It's incredibly rare to have this many elements go right in an image. But when we know the rules and start seeing balanced compositions without even pulling our camera up to our eye, these are the type of shots that we can hope for and expect by understanding these rules. So in our previous rule of thirds slide, this one right here, I showed you how the rule of thirds applies to a portrait or vertical image. Remember that boy in orange. Here you can see how it's applied to a selection of landscape and horizontal images. Notice with the boy on the far right, the intersecting point intersects around his eye. So it's not exactly on the intersecting point, but it's close to his eye. Where the image in the portrait example, remember back to that boy in the orange, in that portrait version, the two intersecting points landed on both of the eyes. Again, remember, as we move further away from our subject, you're going to have to start making decisions on what points of interest are most important and where the elements you want in your frame to land on those intersecting points. So you'll notice in this image of the boy leaning on the bike that the boy is balanced in the frame by his bike handlebars. So he's not centered in this frame. He's off to the left. His eye lands on that upper left intersecting point. And if I had placed this boy in the center of the frame, then I would have had to have cut off the handlebars and maybe even his hand in the frame. And the image would not have felt as balanced as this composition. So he's on the left, the handlebars balance on the right and tell the complete story. If I had to cut off those handlebars with the frame of the camera, then you might not know what he was leaning on and it wouldn't be a complete story. So this image feels balanced because it includes all of those elements and includes the entire handlebar. He, as our subject, is placed on that upper left intersecting point. All right, so in this example, the large horizontal image is the original photo that was taken. So the boy's eyes intersect. If you look back on this slide right here in the bottom left, you'll see that his eyes intersect with the upper horizontal line, but they don't land on directly land on any of the intersecting points, right? So his eyes, they land on that upper horizontal line. Now, because this image didn't have any other elements in it, there's just the boy and a blurry background. So I chose to break the rule of thirds a bit and place the subject more towards the center of the frame. And because he's tilted towards one side of the frame, this is still not a perfectly centered composition. There's a little bit of movement with how he's leaning towards one side. Because there is so much negative space in this image to the right and to the left of the boy, we can crop this image in a lot of different ways. And the image on the left might work well for maybe an Instagram post, and the image on the right might fit well on a web page where we would need a wide format and possibly maybe text over that negative space. This could be used for marketing materials to put text over the negative space. But note once again, the eyes sit in the upper third and the eyes are in focus. And we'll talk more about this in our focus section, but the eyes always need to be in focus. Now in this image, I've placed the subject on the right vertical line. And in fact, her face lands on that upper right intersection point, right? So notice that she is walking in the direction of the left side of the frame where we see the most negative space in this image. So this girl's name is Rahel. And Rahel is moving in this frame from our right to our left. And the movement in this image is Rahel walking, right? That's the movement of this photo. Now, if I had placed her on the left side of this photo, the left vertical line, then the viewer would have felt like she was walking into a wall. And if you have movement in your image, take notice of the direction of that movement and make sure you place your subject in the frame with space and room within that frame to move. So give them space in the direction they are moving. When we look at this photo, we see Rahel walking, right? Even though it's a still photo and it's not a video, she's not actually moving. But our minds, when we look as a viewer at this image, our minds are going to finish the story of Rahel walking to school, right? So she's got a backpack on, she's walking away from home. Our minds are going to finish this story. And so we want to give space within a frame for the character or the subject to move within that frame. So as photographers, right, we want to give that space for the viewer to complete the story in our own mind's eye. Now let's talk about composing groups of people for a moment. We aren't going to always find ourselves in situations where we are photographing a single individual. So far, up until this point, I've shown you a bunch of images of single individual subjects, single people. But it's important to understand composition for groups. So in this first image, we have 4 little girls, right? Notice their eyes are relatively balanced along that upper third horizontal line. And if you view the girls as a single subject, I've placed this group of girls, our singular subject, centered within this frame. There's balance in this image because our subject, again, the group of girls, is centered in the frame, and it extends from one side of the frame to another. I filled the frame with our subject. We want to always try to fill the frame, whether it's our subject plus their surroundings or filling the frame with just our subject. But we always want to keep in the back of our mind, how can we fill the frame when we're taking an image? The second image is another example of a similar setting. So we've got 3 women balanced and centered within this frame, within this image. Now, these girls are all different heights, so their eyes aren't going to land on that upper third horizontal line perfectly. But notice that between the 2 tall girls on the left and the 2 shorter girls on the right, the eyes are balanced on that upper third horizontal line. Some of the taller girls are above that line, some are below, but they are all relatively balanced on that line. And I've filled the frame with these women and centered them within the frame as a group, as a single subject. This third image is a larger group of kids. Again, if you view this group as our singular subject, the subject is centered in the frame on the vertical lines, right? So vertically, I've placed their eyes on the upper third horizontal line, again, just like the last two images. Some of the kids are taller than others, and their eyes land above that horizontal line, and some are below it because they're smaller. But they, as a whole, as a group, their eyes are balanced on that upper third horizontal line. And so in most group settings, it's best to center your group within the frame, unless you've got another subject within the frame that you want to tell a story of. You want to usually center groups, at least to start with, as you learn better photography practices. Now, in this last group shot example, I'm at a different angle. Instead of photographing this group straight on, I chose to take this image at an angle, right? So they were all looking towards and facing the pastor who had given them blankets. And so I wanted their faces to be looking towards the camera rather than photographing this group straight on and having their heads turned to the left. So in this example, I've placed the focus on the boy in the green jacket. His face is closer to the upper right intersection point. And as you look from him, the primary focus point in this group of boys, towards the rest of the boys to the left, the focus falls off, right? It gets blurrier and blurrier as you get towards the boy at the end. So there's a natural diagonal line in this composition along the boys' heads that slants to the far left of the frame and then even follows the lines of the buildings in the background of this photo. So we won't get into much detail on diagonal lines versus horizontal lines and all the details about that in this course. That's a bit of a more complex idea for the advanced photography course, but I did want to briefly show how we can think about lines in our compositions beyond just vertical and horizontal lines of our grids. Diagonal lines and leading lines in photography can bring a lot of focus to where we want the focus to be. And so as you look for scenarios when you're taking pictures, we can look for diagonal lines and any interesting shapes to bring focus into our subject. And so in this image, even though the movement comes from the diagonal lines in this image, the focus, again, in the primary subject in this image, that boy in the green jacket, still lands on the upper right intersecting point. All right, so focus. Blurry or fuzzy focus will ruin an image almost every time. Even images that have intentionally blurred subjects in them have at least one element in focus. So the rule of thirds that we just got done talking about, that's a rule that once we understand, we can break it relatively often. The rule of focus is almost always a rule that should not be broken, especially in the context of photographing people in the field. We want the focus to be on our subjects and to be clear and focused on the face and the eyes of our subject. This is especially true for photographing people. If your subject is a person, that subject should almost always be in focus. Now, reverting back to the technique slides that we discussed, right? How to hold your camera. This is the biggest reason why it's so important to hold and use our tools properly. It's going to help you create images that are in focus, and that's really important. Focus is how we draw the viewer's eyes to where we want them to look in an image. So more often than not, you'll want to place the focus of an image on the subject's eyes. Again, that's so important. If the subject is too far away from the camera to focus on the eyes, then we can focus on the face. And again, the element you focus on tells the viewer where they should look or where their eye should be drawn to first. The nice thing about today's cameras, a lot of, especially the mobile devices that are out there, they're going to naturally or automatically focus on your subject's face. So a lot of times they're doing that already for you. So just depends on the camera device that you have, but a lot of camera systems recognize faces now and focus on those, even if they're moving. So here's an example of an image where the focus is on the eyes. Notice that pretty much every other element in this image is blurry, but the image works well because the eyes and the face are in focus. The intention of this image is intensely focused on this child's eyes, and as the viewer, it draws us into this photo. Another thing to notice about this image is that the contrast in colors also brings our focus on the eyes. So the child's eyes, they're bright white, right? And all of the other colors in this image are relatively dark tones, making our eyes as the viewer draw in with greater focus on this boy's eyes. Now, if this image were taken and the eyes were out of focus in this image, this would be a completely unusable photo. Now, let's walk through a set of images that demonstrate how focus can create depth within an image. Focus can be a powerful tool in creating depth within a photo. So creating depth in an image will make the image more dynamic. It's going to give the viewer a sense that they are a part of the scene. In this first example, I've placed the woman in between these two foreground elements. So the element on the left is a support beam of the structure that she's sitting in. And that element, the blurry element on the right, is a wall within this structure. So these two foreground elements give the viewer a feeling that they are in the structure with this woman cooking. Now, it's important to note that this can also serve as a way of giving the viewer a sense that they are an onlooker, peeking in on a subject without the subject's knowledge. This is often used in movies or film to give the viewer a feeling that they are seeing something they shouldn't be seeing, or that they are looking in on a subject or a scene without the subject's knowledge. In this image, that feeling is alleviated and it's removed from by the subject's smile. So this could have, if she was not smiling, this could have felt like an image where we were maybe a paparazzi type figure looking in on our subject without their knowledge. And we want to be careful when we play with focus like that, because it can separate the viewer from the subject or from the beneficiary, and make them not relatable to each other. In the second image, our subject is clearly the shepherd, right? So the focus is on the shepherd, and most of the other elements in this image are blurred to some level. So in this image, though, we've got that clear foreground element of the goats and a clear background element, those trees in the background. And I chose to shoot through the goats to give the viewer a sense that they are standing in the herd of those goats, that they're a part of this scene. Now, compositionally, what could I have done to make this image a bit stronger? And I'll give some pause to think about that question. What direction does the movement in this image flow? Right? The movement flows left to right, right? The shepherd is pointing to his left, which is our right as the viewer. He is looking to his left, our right. The goats are all moving and they're walking from the left side of the frame to the right side of the frame. And if I had placed the shepherd on the left vertical line instead of the right vertical line, he would have been pointing towards the most negative space in this image and the direction of the movement that is flowing left to right in this image. But instead, he's pointing to the right, right into the side of the frame of this photo. So with this photo, I had to make a conscious decision to shoot this image the way you currently see it, because the goats were not as thick and closely packed together if I had pointed my camera any further to the right of this shot. So I was limited by the action in front of me, and everything was moving really quickly. It wasn't feasible to get the shot exactly as I may have wanted. And many times we're limited by what's taking place in front of us. We're limited by the action in front of us. We're limited by the emotion or the interaction in front of us. And we have to create the best image possible with the action or with the movement that is taking place in front of our camera. Regardless of that one tiny mistake, this is a great image, even though it could have been slightly better, right? We're never going to have a perfect image, but if we know the rules of composition, know the rules of focus we're talking about today, we can try to get as close to great imagery as possible. Now, in the next example, the focus is on the little boy with the green collar, right? Again, we are shooting through foreground elements to give depth to this image. This composition and focus makes us feel like we are a part of the class, right? Feels like you're part of the class with this image. Notice that this boy is more centered in this shot. His eyes are still sitting on that upper horizontal line, if we look back at the rule of thirds, but he is almost perfectly centered in this frame, in this image. The two children in the foreground that are blurred out provide the balance in this image. So if I had placed this boy on either the left or the right vertical lines, either one of the two foreground children would have been either cut off at the edge of the frame, or they would have been smashed up against the very edge of the frame, and the image wouldn't have felt as balanced. So this is a great example of how we can break the rule of thirds by first understanding the rule of thirds. And we've still followed the rule of thirds to some extent, right? By placing this boy in focus, this boy in the green collar. We've placed his eyes on that upper horizontal line, but we have broken it a little bit by not by placing him in the center of this photo. And then lastly, we have another little boy in class. There are foreground and there are background elements in this image, and the focus on this boy separates him from the rest of his classmates, and it draws our eyes to this boy. Notice that he is the only child looking at the camera in this photo. And I chose to put my focus on him because he was the only one looking at the camera, and the light was hitting this boy perfectly within the setting of this classroom. And if I remember correctly about this image, I think I may have even had to wait for this particular child to look at me. I knew I liked the light that was landing on his face, but he wasn't looking at me. So I had to sit and I had to wait for the right moment to happen. And we'll talk about this in greater detail in a little bit, but a lot of my best images have come by putting myself in the right place at the right time and then waiting for the right moment to happen or play out in front of me. We want to. There's a lot of patience in creating great images and great photography, and we have to be okay if the right moment never presents itself. Maybe we set ourselves up for success, we put ourselves in the right position, and the moment just never happens like we had hoped. And we have to be okay with that. There's a lot of patience in photography waiting for that right moment to happen. All right, so let's discuss light. Understanding light, how to see light, how to use light, what to look for when searching for good and or great light is what is going to separate good photographers from great photographers. And earlier I told you that working on your composition will make you a better photographer faster than anything else. Learning how to use light and what to look for is what will take your images from good to great more than anything else. Light is what makes photography possible, right? Our cameras do not function without light. So for the sake of this course, we're going to discuss light and exposure from a very high level. We could get into the weeds regarding lighting, but learning to see and read and use light is going to come with practice. And so today, I want to give you guys some basic things to understand and practice with your mobile devices regarding light. All right, so first, we're going to spend some time talking about exposure. Exposure is simply the amount of light that is reaching the sensor on your camera. So a correctly exposed image will look like your eyes see something in real life. An overexposed image will be too bright, and an underexposed image will be too dark. We want to have our exposures land at a point where it looks like what we would have looked at with our own eyes. That's the goal of great exposure. Now, I own an iPhone, and I've never owned any other smartphone brand. So I'm not super familiar with how other smartphone cameras operate, but I'm assuming that most function in a similar way. So with the iPhone, you can change your exposure by clicking your focus, clicking on your focus point. So say I wanted to click on this boy's face, right? I click on his face, I get that focus point. And then that sun icon is how I can change the exposure by sliding that sun icon up and down. When I touch that sun icon, I get lines above and below that sun icon, and I can slide that sun icon up and down to change my exposure to be brighter or to be darker. The camera is going to always take a light reading that is exposing for a balanced image. But as a general rule, I will always recommend that you expose for your subject's face. When I'm photographing people, I almost always set my exposures based on my subject's face rather than the scene as a whole. Remember, when we look at an image, our eyes will go towards the subject's eyes and the face first, right? We talked about that already. We're going to go, when we look at an image as a viewer, we're going to go right to that person's eyes and their face. In rare occasions, you may want to silhouette your subject against a bright background, but in the context of what we'll be creating content for, shooting and photographing beneficiaries in the field, I would always recommend, or I'm going to most often recommend, exposing for the face, especially as you're learning and advancing in your skills and learning how to understand light. All right, so now there are different types of light, and there are different qualities of light, different times of day, different weather conditions. Those are going to determine what quality or type of light you're going to have access to. So these are the three qualities or types of light that you need to look out for in your context, shooting in the field. There is a fourth type of light, but it's kind of irrelevant unless you're working with studio lighting. So since we're primarily with mobile devices using the sun's light source with our mobile photography, these are the types of and qualities of light that you need to know, you need to understand, and you need to look out for. So the first is hard light. Hard light is generally what we find in the middle of the day or with direct sunlight. And this type of light is the most harsh, and it's the most difficult to work with for photographers. It can still be used to create great images. Just because there's hard light or harsh light, that doesn't mean you can't take your photos. It just is, it's more difficult to work with and manipulate. Hard light generally produces really big contrasty images. And that's why it can still be used to create great imagery, because contrast is really important. You'll notice in this image on the left that Ian is looking up towards the sun. That's creating an even light across his face. And if he had been looking straight at the camera, then there would have been dark shadows in his eye sockets. And that's what makes hard light images unusable. And we want to avoid casting hard shadows in the eyes. It makes it difficult for the viewer to see the eyes. And if we remember back to some of the original slides we talked through, when we're photographing people, the eyes are the most important element in your image. This next image shows soft light, this image in the center. Notice that the light is much more flat in this photo. It took a lot of added contrast in the editing process or in the post-production process to get this image to not look flat. So soft light is the easiest light to work with, because the light across your image is consistent. You don't have to worry about hard shadows covering the eyes when you're photographing your subject in soft light. Soft light can be found in shade. So in general, if you're shooting during the middle hours of the day, look for shade rather than hard light scenarios in the harsh sun. Soft light can also be found during overcast days. Overcast days will create a soft and a flat light that's really easy to photograph in. And anywhere you point your camera is going to have consistent and even lighting. So soft light is really easy to shoot in. It just doesn't make for the most dynamic or the most contrasty images. And then the last type of or quality of light we'll discuss is diffused light. Diffused light is the most dynamic and the most interesting light that we have to use in photography. Diffused light is simply hard light that passes through some type of obstruction. So for example, in this image of this girl in class, the light has passed through a window. It was a direct sunlight day outside, but because it's passing through a window, there's really nice contrast in this image and a nice diffused light that's coming through that window. Window light indoors is great light to work with. So anytime you're taking pictures indoors, look for a window and set your subject up close to that window. It'll serve as a great source of diffused light because that window is serving as an obstruction for the hard light outside. Diffused light can come in many shapes and forms when photographing outside. So clouds can serve as diffusion. Bright but overcast days are a form of diffusion. So sometimes overcast days can be really overcast to where all the light is just really flat. But sometimes the overcast element of the sky is thin. And so you'll have a bright overcast day. That is a form of great diffused light. The light you see during the hour after sunrise and the hour before sunset create some of the best diffused light situations that exist outside, if not the best. These two times, that hour after sunrise and the hour before sunset, those are called the golden hour. And even if there are no clouds in the sky, sunrise and sunset is still diffused light because the sun and its light is passing through the Earth's atmosphere. The Earth's atmosphere is working as the diffusion, and it's breaking up the direct sunlight from the sun. And that's what gives it the beautiful golden color that you see at sunset and sunrise. That light is diffused and spread out by passing through all of the elements that exist within our atmosphere, all the smog, all the pollution, all the air particles. All of those elements within our atmosphere break up the sun's direct light and give it that beautiful golden color. All right, so for this first image, who can tell me what type of light this first image is? I'm going to give some time to pause and just let you take a look at it. So this image is hard light, right? Now this is later in the day during a hard light situation. So even though it's still direct sunlight, it still works pretty well, right? But you can see, if you look close on this man's face, that this man's eyes are in the shadows and his eyes are difficult to see. So again, hard light situations, harsh light situations where you have direct sunlight, especially if the sun is noontime above your subject, it's going to make for dark shadows in the eyes, and that makes it difficult. So this is still a great image, but it could have been better if the light was lower in the sky and closer to that sunset time. Now, what about this image? Can anybody tell me what type of light this image is? And I'll give you guys some time to look at it and take a guess if you're looking at a pre-recording of this video. So this image is soft light, right? Because it's overcast. You can look at the background of this photo and see that it's an overcast day. The sky is really gray. So notice in this image that the light across the entire scene is consistent and it's even. So the blades of grass, the background, the light on this man's face, they're all consistent. And I had to add a lot of contrast in this photo to make it not look so flat. So it's, again, really easy to shoot in soft light. It makes for nice, consistent lighting across the entire image. But you're going to have to add a lot of contrast in post-production or in the editing process to get these images to look as dynamic or close to as dynamic as they can if you had great lighting situations. And then lastly, who can tell me what light is being used in this image? So this image is diffused light, right? This image was taken during sunrise. Now, I love this image. This is one of my first images that I ever took out of country. This is my first trip to Africa. But there are a lot of things that I could have done better with this photo. I use this example of golden hour light to show you how beautiful golden light looks. And even though there are a bunch of technical mistakes that I made in this image, the light is so beautiful that the image still works really well, right? So what I could have done better was if I had moved my feet and gotten at an angle where the sun was more at my back, the golden color of the light could have landed on this boy's face a little bit better. This boy is backlit, and so I had to make the decision to expose this photo so that we can see his face and his eyes. But what that did was result in a blown out portion of the face on that left side of his face, our left, his right, that's completely white. The detail in that white light section of his face, I can never get back in post-production. And so if I had moved to the left a little bit and shot him at a different angle and exposed for the light on his face, rather than backlighting this image, it would have made probably for a better image that had more pleasing golden color light on this boy's face. But because golden hour light is so beautiful, this image again was shot at sunrise. This image still works really well, and it resulted in a beautiful photo. All right. If you have ever had a chance to watch a photographer in action, you might have noticed that they put themselves in seemingly odd positions as they photograph, right? As you learn to take better photos, play with different perspectives. In order to do that, you might be required to get into low or sometimes squatting positions, especially for those of you using mobile device cameras. The zoom feature on most cell phone cameras often results in less than ideal photos. Camera phones are getting better. They're now starting to have additional lenses for the zoom element, but even in those situations, the zoom lens is not nearly as good. And so in order to get the shot that you want, you're going to be forced, and I would always encourage you to move your feet and get closer or farther away from your subject just by walking. Your legs are the best zoom lens that you have in most situations. That's not always going to be the case, but especially when photographing people, your legs are going to be the best zoom lens that you have. So get closer to your subject or further away, depending on what you're trying to communicate, and get at different angles and play with the positioning of your camera to your subject. And play around with different angles and perspectives. Don't just stand up straight and take an image from our normal standing perspective. Our eyes are used to seeing the world from that point of view. We're used to seeing the world from a standing position. And so when we get low and or high and change up the perspective for what we're usually seeing on a day-to-day basis with our eyes, it makes for images that are unique, and how we visually view the world. It's going to be different than what we usually would see the world from. If you're photographing a child or children, get low and get to their eye level. Don't just shoot down on them. If you do that, the images that you create will make the viewer seem as though they are looking down on the subject. And in the ministry space, when we're trying to create relatable content across cultures, having your image give the viewer a sense that they're looking down on your beneficiary, that's not what we want to achieve in our storytelling. So get down to the child's level and get at their eye level. I'm tall, I'm 6'3", so I'm constantly squatting, especially when I'm photographing kids. I'm constantly squatting to get down to their eye level. So here are some examples of different angles and perspectives. This first image was taken at eye level. Again, I'm pretty tall, so even it often means that I'm squatting again to get at that level with my subjects, especially if it's a kid or a child. An eye level perspective puts the viewer at the same level as the subject. And this is an incredibly powerful perspective to shoot from when specifically in the ministry storytelling space, because it's a perspective that can break down barriers. And we're constantly trying to break down barriers, right? We're trying to break down barriers and make the beneficiaries relatable to oftentimes a Western audience. And that's difficult. That can be really difficult to break down those barriers and make those two very different cultures relatable. And so this perspective, putting your camera at the eye level of your subject, mimics how we see people in real life. It's going to put your viewer down at the level of your beneficiary. This second shot is a high angle shot looking down on this boy. So the camera angle in this particular shot, it's really subtle, but the camera is looking down on this subject. And in ministry space, we need to be careful with this type of shot. This can portray vulnerability with this angle, which can be powerful, but this high angle can also portray inferiority and give the viewer the feeling that they are looking down on the subject, and that is not what we want. So this particular image works well because this little boy's smile, it alleviates anything, any feeling of inferiority. His smile gives us the feeling that we're not looking down on him and that he's not to be pitied. And so his smile makes this angle okay. But we really want to be careful when we shoot angles looking down on our subject, because it can give that viewer the sense that they are superior. Now, this third image uses a low angle perspective. We're photographing Rahel here. That's the name of this girl. We're photographing her from below her eye level, looking up at her. The low angle perspectives are great for giving the subject a sense of power. So Rahel wants to be an architect when she grows up. And in telling her story, we wanted to use a camera angle that placed her in a position of power to be able to achieve her dreams. And so that's why we use this low angle perspective. We're looking up at Rahel, and that gives the viewer the feeling that Rahel is in control of her dreams. And then this last image is a great example of an eye level perspective. Now, technically, the camera is at about hip and chest level with these kids as they are running. So the perspective balances on that eye level, again, giving the viewer the feeling that we are at the same level as these kids. But in this particular shot, it serves to give the viewer the feeling that we are running alongside these kids. This perspective, paired with the movement and the action in this scene, draws the viewer in and makes us feel, as the viewer, as if we are a part of the action. Don't ever be afraid to place the camera right in the middle of the action. It helps to give the viewer the feeling that they are there with these kids. Remember back to the images of photographing the kids through their classmates. Those images made the viewer feel like they were a part of the classroom, right? Remember, part of our job when we're storytelling is to make our beneficiaries relatable. Across the globe, every kid in every nation from every language group has raced their friends in the streets, right? We've all done it. We've all raced our friends in the streets, running through the streets. So this is an incredibly relatable image because we've all experienced this in our own childhoods. And so I put the camera in the action at the level of these kids' eyes to give the viewer the sense that they are a part of this action. And then this scene, the movement in this photo, is something that we can all relate to because we've all done this before. It's important that we find ways to relate our subject to our audience. And changing your perspective and the position of the camera in relation to the subject can help achieve those goals. And then lastly, take as many images as possible, right? The best way to get better at photography is to shoot as many images as you can. I truly believe that anyone can become, at the very least, a capable photographer, if not a great photographer. And it's simply a matter of taking a lot of images and learning as much about photography as you go along. There are no better photography lessons than going out and taking pictures. That's how you're going to gain your experience. That's how you're going to get better. That's how you're going to start to see the world through the lens of a camera. I looked back recently at my career, and I've taken somewhere around probably 3 million photos in my 10-year career. I did not start out as a great photographer again, and I don't think of myself as a necessarily talented, an incredibly talented creative. And so when I say I think that everybody can become a good photographer, it's because that has been my own experience. I was not naturally talented at the art form, but I've taken a lot of images, and that's how I got good, and that's how I got comfortable using and seeing the world through the lens. So the next time that we meet, I'm going to have a homework assignment for you guys. The next time we meet, I want you to take some of your images, your favorite images from practicing in the field, and we're going to do some live critiques. So we're going to walk through your images and kind of walk through what you could have done better, what we could have worked on, what positional changes you could have made, what compositional changes you could have made, times of day that you could have shot in. We're going to look at the good and the bad of the photo and just look at things and critique our images. And so I want you guys to take a lot of pictures, gather your favorites, and next time we meet, we will do some live critiques or some one-on-one critiques or group critiques. I don't know what that will look like, but we'll walk through your images together and see what you could have done better. And we'll discuss how we can make those photos better the next time you go out to take more photos. And that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn some basic photography skills and techniques. I'm really excited about this course and the courses that are going to come. This idea of being able to empower national partners and missionaries around the world to be storytellers and communicators of how God is working, how you guys are seeing the Lord transform lives all over the world, I think is really exciting. And I'm excited to see what it could mean for ministry effectiveness and kingdom impact. So thank you guys for participating in this, and we're excited to see how all of this pans out and works for your organizations. So thank you.